So welcome to Discovering the Maverick Factor. I'm Jewel Washington. I'll be your host today. I happen to serve as the Vice President for Talent, Culture, and Engagement here at UTA. And today it is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Tamara Brown. Dr. Tamara Brown serves as our Provost and Senior Vice President of Academic Affairs here at UTA. And today we want to take a little deeper dive into her background and her history and have her share some of her experiences with us. So Dr. Brown, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So today we're going to try to dive a little bit into some of your past. Also, we want to gain some nuggets from you of your experience and your journey here to where you are now. So we're going to go ahead and dive in. Is that okay?
That's okay.
All right. So a little personal history I want to start off with. Okay. So we know that you grew up in rural Virginia. So what are some of the challenges that you would say that you faced, and how did you kind of deal with some of those experiences that shape your journey in higher education?
Well, growing up in rural Virginia, like any other rural areas, one of the challenges is access to opportunities. All right. So when I went to school, it was a 1-hour school bus ride in one direction.
Okay.
So that tells you how far away we were. And so a lot of other folks who lived closer to the county seat in the city had access to opportunities, and they were going to the same school that I was. But I didn't have those opportunities in terms of after-school activities and the like. So that was one challenge, and that's not uncommon from other rural areas. And so a lot of the activities and ways that I prepared really closely connected with school and what could happen during school hours.
Okay.
For me to be able to take advantage. And that continued into college. I placed a lot of emphasis then on the organizations in college, the faculty in college to guide me and so forth. So that was one. Second, in growing up in rural Virginia, when I went to college, I was a first-generation college student. So the other challenge, or depending on how you look at it, opportunity, is that I didn't have family members who were telling me as I was growing up, here's how you're going to approach college, or here's what you need to think about. What they said is you need to go to college. I heard that a lot. That was a
non-negotiable.
That was a non-negotiable. You're going.
Yeah.
But they couldn't tell me what that experience was going to be like. They just knew for me to have opportunities that they didn't have, I needed to go to college.
Yeah.
And so that made a difference as well. Not necessarily about being in a rural area, but being first generation.
Yeah.
So I placed a lot of emphasis then on academics. It was a point of pride for my family when folks had educational achievements and attainments, again, because they didn't have that. And so that became a guiding focus for me, if you will, right? Yeah. Educational pursuit and doing my very best at it.
Yes.
Because that was something that was of value to my family.
Yeah. And you don't want to let mom and dad down, right?
I don't want to let mom and dad down, but, really also my grandparents down. I lived with my grandparents for a while, probably why I have a little bit of an old soul. But they had even less less high school experience. My grandmother was a domestic worker. Yeah. And so she had to stop going to school at in the primary grades because that was the expectation. My grandfather in the military, in the Army, that was his pursuit. And so certainly didn't want to let parents down, but most especially didn't want to let my grandparents down.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, I know throughout my journey, I've had some really incredible mentors. And I've even had people who didn't even realize they were mentoring me or that I would look at them as a mentor. Yeah. So tell us about some of the mentors that you've had in your life that kind of helped you shape the direction that you're going in.
A lot of, I mean, it's interesting that you say, folks didn't even realize they were serving that role. And in some instances, I didn't realize people were serving that role for me. One example is an uncle that I has, my mother's side of the family. I'm the oldest of my generation. He's the youngest of his generation. And so that meant he was my uncle. We were closer in age.
Right.
And so he sort of took me under his wing.
Okay.
I would visit with him in summers. He lived in D.C.
Yeah.
And he would make a point to have me up to visit. And during those visits, he was sharing information with me that I didn't appreciate at the time, but it was mentoring. He was the one, for example, when I was really young, that said, it's important to memorize your Social Security number. And would do memory drills.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I didn't know what that number was or why it was important, but he said it was, so I'm going to try to memorize that number.
Right.
Or he would take me out to restaurants when I would visit in those summers and to say, this is what fork to use. Or I would eat food, and I remember, we had broccoli, and he's exposing me to all kinds of foods, and the broccoli was crunchy. And I said, man, they didn't even cook this. And he said, no, this is how it's supposed to be. We overcook things.
Yes.
This is how it's supposed to be, right? So even just, I'm giving little examples.
Yes.
You can imagine if he took that kind of care, the other kind of things. Well, he's mentoring me and showing me things that are important, but he never said, I'm mentoring, right? Mentoring you, but it's clearly investing time and giving me, guidance about things. So he'd be an early example, and I didn't even know it was happening. And then later, as I'm thinking about college, he took me to a university for their college weekend when they have folks come and check them out. It wasn't even a place that I was necessarily going to go, not that I knew where I was going, but here's somewhere nearby. They're doing a weekend thing. You need to learn what it means to be on a college campus. And so he took me there. And I was sitting with him, and he said, no, go over there. Go look at those people over there. You should be over there. I'll be right here. And he would just sit there so that he was within eye shot. As I went, for the first time, being with people I didn't know at a university. I'd never been, to one, and wasn't really sure what I was supposed to do, but mentoring nonetheless. So some of the mentors, as I reflect back, I didn't even know they were fulfilling that role, but I can see it now. When I was in college, faculty and staff sort of played that role. There were very few African Americans at the college that I attended, both in terms of students and in terms of employees. And so the staff that were there took a special point of introducing themselves and saying, hey, if you need anything, I'm here. And whenever they would see us on campus, asking, questions. You need to be thinking about this. Have you done this yet? How's it going? And so being a source of help and support and guidance when we encountered difficulty. Again, I didn't seek them out, but they sought me and others out to say, I'm going to help you if you would let me. And of course, faculty as well. So for a lot of those formative years that set me on a path, on a trajectory, I wasn't reaching out for mentors because I didn't know what that was. But as I look back, there clearly were a lot of people investing in me in terms of time, advice, just availability for support, and they've really set me up for continued success that I've enjoyed throughout my life, and in terms of a set of the values or perspectives that I now try to emulate as I interact with other people, to be that one that reaches out proactively because somebody did that for me, right? Even though I don't call myself a mentor, they didn't ask me to be a mentor, I'm trying to be proactive.
Yeah. It's so important, right? It's so important.
It is.
So, we all have opportunities sometimes in college to get different kinds of jobs and try to, sometimes we take a couple of different jobs and we're trying to figure out how that's going to shape our future. So can you share with us some of your undergraduate jobs and what kind of experiences did you have with those?
Yes. I had work study jobs on campus all the way through. It was a part of my financial aid package.
Yes.
Because the way that, my family, I grew up very poor and on a farm. And so my family just didn't have the resources. And so in addition to loans and, a few scholarships, I also did work study as an avenue. And so those were the jobs I had. I can remember 3 distinctly. One was in dining services. So we had a main dining hall on campus, and they did family-style meals.
Okay.
And that meant that you came in, you sat at tables of 8, and those of us working in the dining hall served.
Okay.
You didn't go through food lines or anything like that. And so, we came out, took people's orders.
Yeah.
It went to the back, and we had those big trays that you carry like this. Had to learn how to carry the trays and not drop all that food. And, serve on real plates, real silverware.
Yeah.
Those students at the table. And when they were done, we were, bussing the table, turning it over for the next group of 8. Yeah. So that's the way I worked one of the jobs in dining services. Sort of helped me to develop a number of skills that have to do with, hospitality, customer service, the way that you treat people when you're serving them and attending to their needs and bringing them what they want. Another job I had was with the police.
Okay.
So I was one of those on patrol.
Okay.
And I worked dispatch.
Okay.
So I had to learn those codes that they use when I was on dispatch. But often I was on patrol, which meant I had a walkie-talkie and a route I was supposed to be walking.
Okay.
I remember one night, we had 2 high-rise dorms on the campus, about 10 stories or whatever. All the others were smaller, so they stood out. And I had my path, and I just had to walk it for my shift. And one of those routes coming past one of the high-rise dorms, I look, and I see folks on one of the upper floors with a rope, and some other folks on the ground behind the bushes.
Oh, boy.
And that was a little puzzling.
Yeah.
And I thought, what in the world? And I stood there for a while and watched. And wouldn't you know, they were hauling a keg, because that was not allowed, and they were having a party in the room.
Yeah.
And so they were hauling a keg through the window
Okay.
on the upper floor with a rope.
Yeah.
And those standing on the bottom obviously were the lookouts. They had the keg, and they were making sure the coast was clear. I guess they didn't see me.
Yeah.
I remember radioing that in, so things like that.
You told all them?
I told. I was
thought maybe you would have went upstairs and asked for a drink.
I was that kind of person.
Okay.
I was on my radio,
Yeah.
and I reported it. I could hear snickering, and they told me, keep on going. So maybe the officers didn't go, or they did. I don't know. But my job was to report, and that's what I did. So, and then the third job I had was working in the library.
Okay.
And so it was my responsibility to assist with closing the library. So when it's time for everybody to get out, I had to walk all the floors, all the study carrels, and make sure everybody had exited the building. And sometimes it meant being at the front desk so that when the alarm went off because somebody took a book they didn't check out, I was supposed to stop that person. Now, I don't know how I was going to do that.
Yeah. Well, that police training, hopefully.
Exactly. And then, and I, at first when I had that job, I thought, man, this is boring. I'm just like randomly walking the floors for hours. But I was doing that. And then one of my peers said, so you're not studying when you're at the library? I thought, is that what we're supposed to do? Why aren't you walking the floors? They're like, I just walked that floor?
Right.
And so I kind of got a clue then.
Yeah.
Oh, so then I really liked that job, right?
Okay.
So I could sit and study for a little and then get up and walk and surveil, check at the front desk, go back and study, and it really helped me. But work study, a significant part of, my college-going career. In addition to paying the bills, it taught me some skills, like I said, right? Being responsible, being attentive, being a part of a team, because I wasn't the only one working there in those places.
Right.
Gave me some opportunities to study as well. But it also put me in closer contact with faculty and staff.
Okay.
So they had more of an opportunity to see potential in me and to, say words of encouragement or things like that, which were also so important.
Okay. So I want to kind of dive into being a first-generation student a little bit. And I'd like to have you share some of your experiences and your approaches that you've gotten that experience from being a first-generation student. How did that inform those experiences throughout your leadership and decision-making in academics especially?
And it has, as I reflect on it, it does have an impact on how I lead. First of all, it gives me a level of sensitivity and awareness.
Okay.
Right. So when I encounter students who are having particular, challenges, like not knowing where to go for something, I can remember what that felt like. It helps me to also anticipate. So as we think about student success initiatives, for example, I can think about what that would mean for me or for a student today like me, being first generation, in terms of extra steps that we might want to take to implement something that we're thinking about doing. I remember, because I was first generation and I didn't have, those folks who could tell me what to expect, I was open to trying new things and being creative, but it also meant I failed a lot. Like I'm trying something and that didn't work. Well, for those who have someone that can tell them, no, you're going to want to approach it this way. Well, see, their first attempt has a greater likelihood of success. I'm, by trial and error, learning my way, right? Yeah. And so I remember well what that felt like, trying things that to my young, naive mind seemed to make sense, but it didn't work out nonetheless, and how easily discouraging that can be. Okay. And so those are the kinds of things I reflect on as a first-generation student. You don't have the information you need. You may be embarrassed to ask because you think all the other students have it. It always seems that way. You're the only one that doesn't know. Right. If you are willing to reach out for help, it's not obvious where you should go. And you're probably stumbling your way through as you figure out how to do this thing called college. And so when we're thinking about new initiatives to implement that would help students to be successful, those memories, those feelings come back pretty quickly for me, and they guide me in the questions I'm asking, the data that I'm looking for us to gather, but also in the approach to implementing in terms of how we message things to make sure, all of the students can have access to information, even those who don't know they need the information, not just for those who would self-select to come to take advantage of a resource. Right? Yeah. So it definitely influences how I lead in terms of my compassion for people, and being proactive to reach out to help even before help is asked for, but then in how we think about what we are doing. Yeah.
I think we all have these pivotal moments throughout our career that somewhat shape us in different kind of ways. So what is one of those pivotal moments in your career as you were climbing the ladder that you would say helped shape something about you?
Early on, I would say that's probably my grandparents. And again, because I lived with them for a while, they were the ones that were really instilling in me the importance of aiming high and of being a person of integrity. So those are values that shape who I am. That was a pivotal moment. It's not that you know, my family, before I was living with my grandparents, weren't doing those things. They just had a different way of saying it and doing it that made it a little more poignant.
Yeah.
So I would say the time I spent with them really pivotal.
Okay.
I remember one of the things my grandfather said to me. He said, and I can't even remember why we had this conversation. He would just like come out of blue with stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And he said, you know, when we gave you that name, it was a good name.
Yeah. Okay.
And so then there was this whole lesson about, you know, that was kind of an ethics and integrity lesson, right? About it's important to have a good name, that people can trust you when you say something, believe that you're going to follow through and what you say you're going to follow through, right?
Right.
So this be these kinds of lessons. So that would be a part of it, I would say, as a pivotal moment. Another one, when I was in college, I had a teacher that said to me, have you ever thought about graduate school? And to that point, I had not. In fact, I didn't know what that was. And what my family had instilled in me was you go to college, you get that degree, and get a job.
Yes.
And that's what I was doing.
Yeah.
And so when they said, have you considered graduate school? I was like, what? I said, what is that? And so they began to share information, answer all of my questions, and encouraging me to, because that's a pivotal moment, because I would have been happy to have finished that degree, gone back home and gotten a job.
Right.
That changed a whole trajectory for me in terms of considering, you know, possibilities. It took them saying it, though, again, proactive, right? And so I began to work with them, and I went to a small liberal arts college where up to that point, no one had gone to graduate school. So it's also not what the university saw itself as preparing students to do next. That's changed now, but at that time, when I was there, so that they said that to me is also astonishing, because this is not what they do as well. But at any rate, that set me on a path of discovery about graduate school. I remember I mentioned it to my grandmother that I was going to go to graduate school, and she said, you need to finish that degree, get a job. That's all the schooling you need.
That's right.
But I believed my faculty. I kept researching it, exploring, you know, graduate school options. I talked to peers. I had a friend at the time who was a social work student, and she always knew she wanted to go to graduate school in Chicago.
Okay.
And so I got the book on psychology, PhD programs, and found Chicago. That school didn't have my program. I said, well, let me look at some other programs in the state. If she's going to Illinois, must be something good there.
Right.
And that was kind of my approach.
Okay.
I also was accustomed to experiencing academic success.
Okay.
Right? I was in the National Honor Society in high school.
Okay.
Right? I graduated with honors in college. Okay. So I'm applying to graduate school, and I know how to work hard academically and how to perform well. I applied to all these programs, and I started getting envelopes in the mail.
Okay.
And the first one I got was a thin envelope, and you could see pink through the window, like in the. And I thought, I got in, and I rushed to open the envelope, and it said, "We had a lot of great applicants."
I am so sorry.
This year, it was really tough to choose, but I am so sorry you're not getting in. I thought, oh, that's okay. That wasn't the one with the pretty offices anyway.
Okay. I'll wait for that anyway.
Right, exactly. That was a school that was University of Connecticut.
Okay.
But the Bowling Green,
Okay.
they had the pretty offices, so I will wait on them.
Okay.
And I got that envelope.
Yeah.
It was thin.
Oh, shoot. Okay.
I got another envelope. It was every school
Wow.
except for one was a thin envelope.
Okay.
I got the one from Illinois,
Okay.
It was thicker, and it was an invitation to interview. And at that time, to get into grad school, you had to interview in person.
Wow.
And so I thought, it's not thin.
Yes, yes.
This is good. I mean, but that was a moment that it first entered my mind. Something might not work out. I wasn't accustomed to that
Right.
pivotal moment because
Right.
all those other envelopes were thin.
Right.
I went there and I had to fly. I've never been on an airplane before. I've never really left home.
Yeah.
So that was just a whole big turning point. I went there, I interviewed. I did get in. And again, I picked that school in Illinois because it was in the state where another student I knew at the time was going to go to Chicago.
Right.
That's how I ended up picking that place.
Wow.
It wasn't until years later
Yeah.
that I learned that was the number 3 program in the nation for my discipline.
Well, okay.
I was like, whoa, right? Higher rated than the others that I didn't get into.
Right.
But again, I didn't know that.
Right.
And I continued to have challenges when I was in that graduate program. I failed statistics in my first year. I've never failed a course before. We're talking about pivotal moments,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And I thought, oh God,
Yeah. What's going on here? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
what if I can't do this?
Right.
So it was a challenging program. There were folks, my peers in the program, who helped me, continue to persist, to continue to try. And I remember, this is another aspect of being first generation, so I call home, begin to prepare my family for the possibility
Okay.
this might not work out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember my mom saying, "Oh, that's okay, you can come home." I thought, she meant it to be encouraging.
Yes. Yeah.
But it was just
Yeah.
it felt like another layer of failure,
exactly. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so again, when you're never gone, you want the best for your kids, but doesn't mean you know how to support that.
Right. Right.
I appreciated it for what it was, but not helpful,
Okay.
not helpful. So I relied on my peers. Obviously, I graduated and have been successful since, but those were like pivotal moments, right? Of, in that case, being resilient and persisting in the face of challenge, which I had not experienced until that point. And it was a very high stakes moment to experience those challenges, but I persisted, I continued.
Yeah.
And so when I talk to graduate students today, or those who want to go to graduate students, I try to forecast for them. If you experience challenge, here's how you should interpret that. It does not mean you can't do it.
Okay.
It does not mean you shouldn't be there.
Right.
Here's what it means, and here's how you should approach it.
Okay.
That would have been helpful for someone to say to me. And so I'm trying to, again, be proactive for other students to say, persist, be resilient, know that you can,
Right. Right.
but you need a different approach.
Right. Okay. Well, let's kind of keep going down that path of you being a mentor.
Mm-hmm.
And so, can you tell us a story about, someone student you mentored, and perhaps, what are some of the significant things that you would say impressed you with this particular student?
Yes. My approach to mentoring students is to try to call out for them possibilities that they should consider that maybe they haven't thought of, and just the way that was done for me. I can remember a student for whom that happened. The other part is helping students to think flexibly about the pursuit of their goal.
Okay.
I had a student one time who wanted to pursue a particular major, and I could tell she was so passionate about it. It was in the performing arts. She wanted to be a dance major.
Okay.
But when she talked to her parents, they said, You can't make money in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You need to have a major that you're going to get a job. And she kept trying to convince them. She was unsuccessful, and they made her change her major to business. And it looked like it was soul killing for her.
Yeah.
Like she just was, her countenance had fallen. She was feeling discouraged. She's doing her best and performing well, but you could see just going through the motions. And over, the course of time in talking with her, I said, you can do both, right?
Okay.
And she said, really? It was like that faculty person saying to me, have you considered graduate school? And I was saying to her, have you considered a way to do both of those things?
Right.
That you can pursue a degree that your family appreciates and the field that you want to pursue. And so she began to light up with a little possibility. And I said, you want to be a dance major, but what are you going to do with that?
Yeah.
Odds are you're not just going to dance.
Yeah.
Do you want to open a studio?
Okay.
Do you want to, right? And she said, yeah, one day. And I said, that's opening a business.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? How about pursuing business to help you with your dance business?
Okay.
Oh, everything just turned around for her.
Yeah. Just kind of changed her focus.
It changed her focus, yes.
Yeah.
And now she can pursue that with an entirely different goal in mind. I'm not just doing this because my parents are making me. This is in the service of my goal, and I can still do dance. Okay. And, over the course of time, she was back to taking dance classes and business classes with a purpose. Yeah. And that was just, for me, I could see myself all over again. Somebody helping you imagine a future that you hadn't considered. And when the lights came on for her, I'm like, that's the sweet spot.
Yeah.
I could do that all day, every day.
Yeah. I get it. I totally get it. So, you've been very successful in climbing the ladder in higher education. And so what are some of those qualities that you would say an effective leader in an academic setting needs and needs to cultivate? What are some of those qualities and things that you would say academic leaders need?
Well, one of the things you'll hear a lot is if you read a job ad, a job description, or what people say about academic leaders is being strategic and being visionary. I think both of those are important, and it's really about how you pursue those. For me, in terms of being visionary and strategic, really, a significant part of that is listening to other people. I'm not an autocratic leader, so I don't view it as my job to make up the vision and then dictate it to everyone. This is the direction we're going.
Okay.
And then try to coerce, cajole, influence, force people to go in the direction I'm going.
Okay.
That's not visionary leadership in my view. Okay. In my view, it's about listening to folks in the institution. Where do they want to go? What do they see are the challenges? What are the roadblocks to getting there? And then putting that in the form of a vision that represents what we're all saying about our preferred future, or what we're all saying about what we see as sort of the next level. Here's where we've been, here's where we've come, and here's where we're going. So when I step into a leadership role, I view it as stepping into a moving stream. There's a lot that has come that's flowing already. I've stepped into the stream at a particular point, and my responsibility is to keep the flow going.
Okay.
And wherever we're trying to go, if it means, helping us to veer a little bit, I'm pointing us toward our North Star.
Okay.
Which I didn't make up right now, right? I'm in a plan of succession about where we've been trying to go. So certainly listening internally, but listening externally as well, right? the world is changing, and the pressures on higher education are different these days than they were before. There are things that maybe we used to could take for granted that we can't anymore. In terms of the value proposition, as I said, when I was going to school, the message was you need to go to college. That's going to be beneficial for your future.
Right.
These days, folks are saying, maybe.
Yeah.
Our students are asking, but is it though? Right? There's some skepticism.
Right.
And so the way that we are getting to our goal needs to flex to address those very real concerns about the value and to make sure we actually are still delivering value, right? In the ways that meet the current moment. So listening externally about what are the concerns out there, what are the needs out there, the pressures out there, and then marrying those two together, right? So that we are relevant and accomplishing our goals. And being visionary and strategic is me keeping ever before us our North Star. Okay. This is who we are. Okay. This is how we do it.
Right.
This is where we said we want to go.
Okay. All right. So, in your experience, what are some common barriers to student success? You've kind of talked a little bit about some of them, and how can universities address those barriers effectively?
One of the barriers that I see is we use a lot of jargon and we have a lot of processes that help us to do the business that we need to do. There are a lot of regulatory rules and laws that we have to comply with, and our processes are in place to make sure we do that as we're educating students. But sometimes we can forget that there are other ways that we can accomplish our aims that don't create so many hoops that people have to jump through. And so if we think about all that we're doing from a student-first lens, how would we design our processes, right? I think that's the question that I keep ever before me, and that I think we all should. A lot of processes that university put in place are from a staff-first lens.
Right.
This would make it easier for me
us.
to make sure we're doing what we need to do.
Yeah.
But if we have a student-first
Right.
lens, we can accomplish that, but we certainly would do it in a different kind of way. Let me give one concrete example.
Okay.
We have a lot of forms here.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, right. Whenever we want to do something, we create a form and have students fill it out.
Yes.
My goal is to do away with all of those forms.
Okay.
Now, that's a little hyperbolic. Obviously, we're not doing away with all forms.
Right.
But if we have that as our goal,
Right.
then how could we have students do what we need them to do without the use of a form?
Okay.
Well, one way is to use the data we already have.
Okay.
When students apply here,
Right.
they fill out those applications.
Right.
We have a whole lot of data on them already. How can we use the data we already have to identify the students that would benefit from a particular service, rather than saying, if you want this service, fill out a form to get it? Again, maybe my first gen lens coming through about how to be proactive in providing the support to students even when they don't know to ask for it, right? If you have a form, that means students have to know the form exists.
Right.
Using this form will meet my need, and I need to now fill out the form. Well, that's a lot of onus on the student
Yes, it is.
when we have the data already available. So one of the goals I have is, how do we make actionable use of the data we have, so that if there is a form we're asking for information we don't have any other way to get from the students.
Okay.
That would mean they'd have fewer questions to answer to get the help they need.
Yeah.
And it would mean that we'd be reaching out to them proactively. You know, you might not be aware of this service, but I encourage you to consider it. And here's how you get to it. And here's how it could help you.
Yeah.
So less jargon, more use of information we already have as a way to reach out to students that we suspect or perhaps know could use a resource that we know we have here. So just eliminating barriers, streamlining processes to make it easier for students to get where they want to go. Another is, we've been talking in academic affairs about how to make it easier for our undergraduate students to continue on to graduate degrees here. Mm-hmm. How can we convey to students, again, let me put my first gen lens on. I didn't know anything about graduate school.
Right.
So then how do we inform, like my professor did for me, have you considered going to graduate school? Mm-hmm. And here's what that would look like. And you don't even have to go, you don't have to leave UTA.
Right.
To get there. And let's make it easy and let's help you get there. So connecting some of those dots as well before students are thinking about it. Mm-hmm. As a way of making it easy for them to continue on and get the advanced degrees, which are going to be helpful for some of the things they want to do in life.
Yeah. I love that, really looking at it through that student lens. I think that's so important, and so often we don't look at it from that client or whatever perspective.
Yeah.
So you kind of said a little bit about with the, having to fill out a form for everything, but tell us some other specific projects or programs that we're working on here at UTA that you're particularly excited about, and hopefully how they aim to, help with that enhancing student success.
Well, a couple others I'll mention. One is our app, and the other is holds. Let me start with holds.
Okay.
When students haven't done something that they need to do, the way that universities make sure they do it is they put a hold or a stop in their accounts that prevent them from engaging in activities until they do that thing we need them to do.
Okay.
And one of the ways that we apply holds is that we prevent students from being able to register for the next semester's classes until they've done something. And I've asked, the staff to look at eliminating as many enrollment preventing holds as we can. What's important is that students do these things that they have to do. But what's also important is that students stay on track to their degrees. And so if we put a hold on, and now they can't register for the next semester's classes, they're going to be thrown off in their degree pursuit. And by the time they address that hold, the very class they need may no longer be available. So can we find another way other than preventing them from registering in classes, which is what we want them to do, to accomplish the requirement that we know has to happen? The other is we are working on updating our mobile app.
Okay.
Currently, that platform is, it sends you to websites. So if you go to the app and you click on something, it's going to pull up one of our websites to provide you with information. I want the app to be action-oriented. You actually do things. In fact, everything that a student needs to do, I want them to be able to do through the app.
Okay.
We carry around our cell phones
all the time. Mm-hmm.
And we transact all kinds of business.
Right.
We buy stuff online, right?
Amazon.
We're on Amazon. Right? Yeah. We're ordering food, right? Through various food vendors and having it delivered. I mean, pick something. We pay in the power bill. I mean, everything on our phones. Right. But when it comes to the university, it's a screeching halt.
Right.
You can't do anything through the app other than pull up a web page that gives you information about it. Okay. I want students to be able to take care of all that they need through the app, including advising. In my view, if advising could happen 24/7, so that if it's a weekend and students have a question, it could be answered on the weekend when they have the question, so they keep moving forward versus, well, you got to wait until Monday at 8 o'clock and then schedule an appointment, which may not happen for days or maybe the following week. Well, my God, I've forgotten the question by now. Or maybe the question is irrelevant, right? Yeah. And I think through the incorporation of AI technology that would power the app, we would be able to provide advising when students have their questions and need the help, not just during business hours when there's an open appointment, and a host of other vital services for students. So those are just two. Again, making it easy, streamlining it, using the technology that we use in every other aspect of our lives, which, by the way, is AI powered. That's why when you order something on Amazon, it said you may also like.
Right.
It's pointing you to other things you didn't ask for. Well, my goodness, if a student was on the app and it pointed them to other things they didn't ask for, but that they also need from a higher education environment. Hey, did you know this deadline's coming up for your assignment?
Yes.
Did you, right? And so that it's all happened. Oh, I didn't know that. Let me click and do it right now. That I think is going to be a game changer for students, and it's going to help UTA be a leader in higher education for being the first university that can figure out how to make all of our various systems talk together, because that's what it's going to take to do that.
So another question for you. So, we have rolled out our Maverick Factor campaign. And if you were to describe your Maverick Factor in 3 words, what would they be?
Those 3 words would be serving with passion.
Okay.
I have a servant's heart in my approach to things. So I'm always thinking about others and how I can serve, whether it's our faculty and how I can serve them by supporting them to be excellent in the classroom, or to be excellent in doing their research, or excellent in the ways that they serve at UTA and in our larger community and in their disciplines. Or whether it's with staff, how can I serve by supporting their professional development, equipping them with the tools to do what they do in a more excellent way, so that they, not only are they playing an important role here, but they know that they are, and they feel equipped to do that. Or whether I'm talking with students, as we've already been talking about, how can I serve by making it easy for them to be successful while they're here and when they leave us? And that's just a passion for me. So I would say serving with passion. That would be my Maverick Factor.
So we hope that you've gained a lot of knowledge from Dr. Brown today, and we just thank you for joining us today. If you are interested, you can subscribe, and you can find out more about Dr. Brown and her journey, as well as UTA at uta.edu. Until next time, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you again.
Thank you.